Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtada Khan, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about the United States exploding national debt. Most countries feel that America, even though it is the biggest economy in the world at $31 trillion, the fact that it is now it has the biggest debt in the world. Nearly one third of the global debt is part of the US debt at $37.9 trillion. That the United States, under the weight of this debt, will cease to remain the world's preeminent superpower. So the argument is that as the debt accumulates, American economy is going to suffer, American power is going to suffer, and America's stature as the most important country in the world and the most powerful country in the world will decline very quickly because of the debt. And increasingly, while American politicians themselves worry about the debt, they do nothing about it except to increase it as fast as possible. Even when Republicans are in power, even though they talk about fiscal responsibility, they just increase debt by cutting taxes, which is cutting income, and increasing expenditure by going to wars. So what you're seeing right now is the US debt clock. If you Google it, you can go to the website and you can see in real time how America's debt is rapidly increasing. So the current debt at the about 5 minutes before I started recording this was $37.925 trillion. It's quite possible that by next month it could reach $38 trillion. But this is something quite transparent about the United States, that we don't hide the fact that we are a highly indebted country. But in this conversation, I want to ask a couple of questions. How serious and how problematic is this situation, number one? And how does the United States compare with its challengers and other major powers in the world and major economies in the world? Is the United States economic situation in really a bad shape as we think? So this is the first slide. I'm going to show you about 8 slides, and in that I will try to put the US debt in national and global perspective. So this is the first slide. You can see all the details that you want to know about the US debt, etc. And then I'm going to zoom in on this particular corner in the top left, where you can see the total US national debt in the next slide, and we can talk a little bit more about that. So if you look at the total debt is $37.9 trillion. Debt per citizen is $110,000. So the debt per citizen is more than GDP per capita, which is around 90,000. And debt per taxpayer is over $325,000. And the US budget, US federal spending, this is the budget for this year is $7 trillion. That's what it says, US federal spending official. This is the budget of the federal government. And US federal deficit is $1.7 trillion, which means the United States is borrowing nearly 2/7 of it. So it's overspending by close to $1.7 trillion. This does not obviously take into account how much tariffs Donald Trump is collecting. But let me tell you, the tariffs are at the most around $20 to $30 billion. Even if it's $30 billion, starts in April. So in 8 months, 9 months, it's about $270 billion. It is not really going to have a significant impact on the debt situation or the budget deficit at all. So this is the current US fiscal situation. But let me explain to you something which is very important, is that when we say the US has $37 trillion, let me break it up for you to give you an idea of what it really means. So the US gross federal debt, that means the US government owes $37.9 trillion, of which $7.3 trillion is intragovernmental debt. So I think this is the money that the United States government is borrowing, I don't know, from Social Security or other places. So this is within the government itself. So one branch of, it's not the branch, well, basically, let's I don't know where they're borrowing this, but the federal government is borrowing money from the government itself. So the $37 trillion debt is just 7.3 goes down. So the US debt, the public debt held by the United States, is actually $30 trillion and not 37 because it's borrowing from itself. And then the total gross external debt is $28.6 trillion. There is very little debt held by American citizens, which is about $2 trillion. The rest of the America's debt is held by foreign countries and foreign private investors. So it's not just that countries are buying US Treasury bonds and US debt, but there are, I guess, individuals and private corporations also who are investing money in the United States. So keep that in mind and focus on this figure of $30.1 trillion. Now, look at this. These are the top 10 economies in the world. And it gives you the national debt, the first column. The second column is GDP growth per domestic product, or GDP to the total GDP of the country. And then you have the public debt to GDP, and then external debt to GDP. Those are the two things. External debt is money owed to entities outside the United States. So the US has $38 trillion as national debt. Its total GDP is now $31.5 trillion, but its public debt is just 96.6%. So when you read in the newspapers, etc., that the US GDP to debt ratio is 1.25% or 1.3% or 130%, it includes the intergovernmental borrowing. So what this particular chart does is takes away intergovernmental borrowing, and basically what does the government borrow from its own citizens and from citizens of foreign countries. And you will see that it's only 96.6%. So the US GDP at the moment is more than the US external debt, which is around $30 trillion. China, on the other hand, if you notice, its national GDP debt is $16 trillion, 16.5, and its gross domestic product is over $18 trillion. So its public debt to GDP ratio is 86.86%. And then if you look down, Germany is 74, Japan is huge. It's nearly 300%. So Japan's GDP is $4 trillion. Its debt is $12 trillion. So it is borrowing 300%. This is an example of, if you compare to Japan, America is in a very, very economically healthy situation. If you look at India, India is not very significantly better than the United States. So India's GDP is $4.29 trillion or $4 trillion, and its national debt is $3.7 trillion, which is 93% of its debt is. So the GDP to debt ratio of the US is 96 and India is 93. So when Indians, particularly who think that the US is in a grave financial situation because of its debt, you should realize that India is not far behind. There's only 3% difference. And then if you look at UK, it's far worse, 115%. France is 125%. Italy is 162%. Brazil is like India and the US, 95, 96. And Canada is 119. So the only two countries which are really better off than all the other G10 countries are China and Germany. But if you look at India and China, there's something very significantly different about them from all the other countries. So for example, if you look at the external debt of the United States is 88%. So what the US is borrowing is 88%, whereas China and India are just 15% and 19%. The rest of the countries are really, really in bad shape except Brazil, which is at 74.68. So it's the BRICS countries are the only countries which seem to be in the top. So the rest are G7. So basically the top 10 economies are G7 plus BRICS, three of the BRICS, China, India, and Brazil. So if you look at Brazil, India, and China, their external debt is very low. So they are not borrowing from foreign entities. They're borrowing from their own population. So that means they can pay in rupees and they can pay in local currency. They can pay back the loans in local currency. They don't have to pay their debt in dollars. Whereas the United States debt and rest of the G7 countries, their debt is all external debt. So they are borrowing from foreign countries, from each other, most probably. And that is a very interesting scenario, which means that they just can't print their own currency and pay it to their, like these European countries can't just print more euros and give it to their own citizens because it will cause inflation and so on. So now, why is this important? It is important because for the United States, because the dollar is the global currency. So a lot of people are buying dollar or investing in dollar and thereby contributing to the US debt because it's a good investment. Which means what I'm trying to say is that if you look at which country, Canada, all of these are huge external debt. Well, if you look at Japan's external debt is probably the closest to the United States. And so because the debt is owed in dollars, the US just has to print its own currency and pay off, whereas Japan will have to buy dollars to pay off its external debt, and which means that the value of its own currency will go down, and then the GDP will go down, and then the percentage of the debt to GDP ratio when measured in dollars will really, really go up. So that is why if you look at it, compared to the most of the world, the United States is not really in a bad shape at all. And so those who think that the United States is going to crumble under the weight of its debt, it may, but so will all other countries who are in worse shape, all these so-called great G7 economies. Look at Canada, look at France. All of them are really in a bad shape. The only countries who seem to be okay for debt-wise are US, China, Japan, and Brazil. But that doesn't mean it's not a problem. It is a problem, and I'll tell you why. So if you look at the US expenditure, the US income for this year, or the US budget, federal budget is about $7 trillion that I showed you in the beginning. How does the US spend its money? So 24% of the money is spent on health insurance. So basically nearly $1.7 trillion is on health insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, etc. Social security is 21%. So basically the safety net, the welfare state, is about 45%. That is what America is paying to keep its citizens happy. And the defense budget is 13%. This is a bit too much. I mean, the US, imagine, this is 13% of the budget, not of the GDP. You must understand that. The US GDP is 4 times or 4.5 times more than its budget. So you can say the US is spending about 3.5% of its GDP on defense, which comes to about 13% of the budget. But the interest on debt, this is slightly old. This is 2024's allocations, but currently the interest on debt payment has increased. It's $1.2 trillion. And therefore the US is paying nearly 15%. So the US is giving away more money in interest than on defense. And then look at it. It's on economic security program, 7%, on education, just 5%, on research and science and medical research, it's just 1%. So it's about $70 billion. This is what the US is spending. The federal budget is spending on science and medical research, just $70 billion, which is actually equal to India's defense budget. But still, the US can afford to spend more if it can reduce the debt. Imagine if the interest on debt payment was 3%, then we would have close to what, 10% of the budget, another $70 billion, $700 billion to invest in other fruitful. We could provide 10% for education, maybe 5% or even 10% on science and medical research. The miracles we could perform with spending $700 billion on education and healthcare. Can you imagine that? Instead of wasting trillions of dollars going on wars on Iraq, in Afghanistan. I mean, the US has been perennially at war in this century, nonstop, since 2001, invasion of Afghanistan in October of 2001. It is a crime, I think, paying 13% of your income on interest. So this is the problem. The US could be a much better country, a much more healthier country, much more knowledgeable, and pushing more on the frontiers of science and research and doing wonderful things for America and for the rest of the world if it can simply cut its interest payments. And also, we don't need a 13% defense. The US could easily reduce to 7%. So take 5 or 6% from here, cut off the debt, and the debt can be reduced by just raising taxes by 1% on the wealthy. Okay, look at this: government budgets and top national expense. Now, this is a comparison of just the top 5 countries. I didn't want to go into the others. So basically, you have US, China, Germany, India, and Japan, the top 5 economies of today. So if you look at the first column, it's the total budget. So the US total budget is $7 trillion, which is actually more than India's entire economy. China's budget is $4 trillion, which is equal to Japan and India's economy. And then Germany is 2.27. India's budget is about $600 billion. And Japan's budget is 1.73 trillion. This is a very interesting figure because right now, both India and Japan are of the same size in GDP. They are both of 4.1 and 4.2 trillion dollars. But Japan's budget is, wow, nearly 3 times India's budget. Wow. That's because of its social security, which is 1.15 trillion. So it's a massively welfare state. So anyway, so the highest expenditure of the US, the first is social security, 1.5, and then as the second biggest expenditure is defense, 1.3. Third expense is national net interest. This has changed. I think now the highest is social security. The second is net interest on debt, followed by defense, followed by Medicare, and then other health, Medicaid, Medicare separate. But if you join Medicare and Medicaid, then it becomes number 1 in terms of healthcare. But the point I'm trying to make is interest payments are in the top 2 or 3 for the US. And this is what hurts if you have such a high debt. Your country suffers because of this. China, look at China, $4 trillion government funds. So it's intergovernmental expenditure, giving it other social insurance fund. This is their version of social security, which is more than the US, obviously, given the fact that it's 1.4 billion population. Its defense budget is just $234.5 billion. It's like 1/4 of the United States. And then it's spending on agriculture, forestry, science, and technology is its 5th highest expenditure. That is stunning to me, that it's spending roughly the same amount that the United States is on science and technology. The US is spending about 70 billion. China is spending 64 billion. But this is on a budget which is nearly half of the US. Little more than half. So they seem to have their priorities right. And you can see that there's no debt payment is not the top 5. If you look at Germany, healthcare, then education, they are smart. Education is second highest. Labor and social pension funds and defense is in the 5th position, thanks to US support of NATO. And this is what is driving Trump irritated. They're not spending as much on research, but they're spending on education. If you look at India, India's highest, biggest expense is interest payments. I don't understand why people don't talk about it. I don't understand why people don't talk about the fact that the biggest item on India's expenditure is interest payments, $125 billion of the 600. Defense is $95 billion. Subsidies, $54 billion. State shares of taxes, 51. Pensions, $35 billion. It's amazing. Nothing on education, nothing on science. Look here, China, science comes here. Look at Germany, education pops up in the top 5 expenses. But for India, no. The Vishwa Guru is not spending on education or research. Look at Japan, Social Security, again, debt service like the US, right there, up there. Local allocation tax, I don't know what that is. Public works, defense is up there. Neither science nor education is in the top 5 for Japan either. So there's one more item that I want to share with you, which is the wealth of the public. So the US can get rid of its debt, I'm sure, if we increase our budget taxes by 2 to 3 to 5%. I have no problems. I'm not a rich person. I'm not even in the top 20% of the American income. By income, I'm in the top quartile. I think I'm in the top 25, not in the top 20 even. But I'm willing to pay 5% extra taxes. Imagine if the top 1% of the United States pays 5% extra tax. We will easily get rid of this stupid debt. We will save trillions of dollars every year in interest payments. I don't understand this at all. Democracy is supposed to be the best form of government. It's very clear that it is also the stupidest form of government, that we have 435 congressmen and 100 senators and a president, and they don't get it, that they are wasting $1.2 trillion a year in interest. Anyway, so this is the total wealth of countries, the top 10 to wealth. The United States public debt, public assets like me, and if you take all Americans, how much money do we have? $163 trillion. That much money we have. All Americans combined have $163 trillion. Our debt, national debt, is $38 trillion. We can easily pay this thing off. 10% tax, 5% tax. In 4 years, 5 years, we can pay the whole debt off. We'll be debt-free in 5 years. If we increase, we have a tax. China's total wealth is $91 trillion. Japan is $21 trillion. UK has $18 trillion. Germany, India has $16 trillion of public wealth. And France, Canada, South Korea, and Italy, etc. South Korea has more money, even though it's not in the top 10 when it comes to GDP. And if you notice that Brazil has fallen off. America has the money. American public has the money. It is irresponsible of us to not pay off our debt. So this is my conclusion, that yes, America has the biggest debt, but it also has the biggest economy, and it has the wealthiest of population in the world. America can easily pay off the debt. They are unnecessarily undermining their own education system, their own healthcare, their own scientific research budgets by cutting there and wasting money on interest payments, on a higher, like for example, Donald Trump is adding what, $3 to $4 trillion of debt because he's giving tax cuts to rich people. Two things that we are doing are profoundly stupid. One is spending so much on defense, nearly $1.2 trillion, and spending $1.2 trillion on interest payments. This is criminal behavior. And the US, compared to other countries, is not doing badly at all. Some very interesting facts is that China and India and Brazil have very low external debt, and the US has a huge external debt. Nearly most of its debt is external, which in a way says, come collect it. Maybe we should just say, okay, we're not going to pay, I don't know, then we won't be able to get more debt. That's why I guess we are so reliable in paying. And plus, if we do that, I think the value of dollar will also diminish. But anyway, I don't think that the debt crisis is such a big crisis as people think. But that doesn't mean that we should continue to hold on to it. We can be in a far, far better position. We can become an incredible country if we can just raise taxes on the rich by 5% and pay off this stupid debt. Thank you for watching Conversations. If you have not already subscribed to this channel, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share it with your socio-political network. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtada Khan. Take care.